Yesterday, we made a kind of a first entry in recognizing that our senses present to us a very limited view of the entirety of the cosmos. The physical world even far exceeds the range of our senses. We are taught in science that the eyes see only a very narrow band of the entirety of the electromagnetic spectrum. And this spectrum is still the domain of the physical world. We can even say, just as the eyes, the ears also catch a very narrow spectrum of sounds. Dogs can hear much higher frequencies and so on. So we can say that our physical senses give us barely 1% of the range of the material world alone. And the material world itself is barely less than 0.01% of the totality of the cosmos. There was a question someone asked during lunch break. He said, is it true that there are multiple universes? If we go back to the logic of what we discussed this morning, since the origin is one, indivisible, even if there are many universes, they would all be united in the one. And if they are united in their foundation, then there would be interactions on all other levels too. So if you say there is a multiple universe or a multiverse, well, they still end up being connected somehow, and you can call that one universe. But in this one cosmos, there are many gradations of consciousness, the physical world being the densest and lowest in the ascending scale. And as you go up, the material, the substance becomes more and more plastic. In the gross physical world, we are bound in this location, space, time, and the physical senses. But if you shift up into the domain of the vital world, the domain of life energies, you are no more bound by form. The character of the material world is, it is a world of form. Everything concretizes into rigid forms. But in the vital world, the character is one of energies. And forms do exist, but they are fluid. It is the energy which is the dominant theme. So when, for example, you express an emotion, or there is a push from within for a desire, or a pull, or attraction, or repulsion, these are the energies, and those are the realities of that world. And they may be represented in forms. And that's why very often when we wander into those worlds in dream, we see them represented symbolically in forms that we associate with that quality of energy. Because our registering consciousness, which is material, needs form. And so when an energy is sensed, it translates it into a corresponding form which it is familiar with. So when something hostile comes to us, we represent it in our imaging as something dark. Or it takes on forms of a snake or some animal which is wild or dangerous to our consciousness. But the same animal may be sacred in another tradition, and they would see it differently then. And still above, as you move further, you enter the domain of the mind, where the character or reality, substance of reality is thought and idea. And that is even more fluid and flexible than the domain of energies. So as a first shift from the material to the vital, you lose the rigidity of form, but you also lose the binding character of space. So in the domain of energies, someone is close to me energetically when I care for them, even if it is negative or positive. I care for somebody, I energetically connect, and they are close to me. Those who are distant to me in energy are felt as distant in space. So that is why in your emotions, if you feel somebody, remember somebody, dwell in your emotions on them, suddenly there's a click, there's an energetic connection, and you feel them close. Dwelling on them again negatively, I hate this person, eventually you end up feeling close to that person in hatred. And the hatred though provokes the same response in the other person. He feels that energy of hatred coming in him, and because it has the quality of your energy, his spontaneous energetic turn is in hatred back towards you. And we build this whole energetic connection of mutual hatred. And a few days down the line, we are already glaring at each other. And if I go back and think what started it, oh, the other day I waved to him and he didn't see me. Something trivial has built up all this huge energetic imbalance, and you are already a victim of it. There is a freedom in space in the vital world. As you go into the mental world, there is a freedom in time. Observe, in the physical world, you can't go backward in time. In the vital world, in your energies and emotions, you can. You can remember somebody who has passed on in material time, but energetically you may still feel close. You can remember an event and recall the sentiments or the emotions of that event. But when you enter you can recall the sentiments of that event, but you cannot experience in energy what happened then. You experience only the remembrance, the effect of the remembrance in the present. It's a new response that comes. So a few years down the line, I remember the same event, I don't feel so connected, I don't feel so affected, because the present response is different. But in the mental world, you can actually go back in time. You can go back and relive in your mental visuals, for example, in your thoughts, and actually relive what happened then as a reality of the present. So as you go up from the physical domain, higher up, not only substance becomes plastic, but its character becomes more free, and the binding conditions of matter, of space, time and circumstance becomes weaker. So in the mental world, you can actually create or experience different kinds of universes. And this is really what happens when a writer creates a novel. And especially if you look at science fiction, they conceive of entire universes based on completely different values or laws. If ever you have read science fiction, some of these can be fascinating. Dune was one of those great stories which created a world that was so radically different from ours, and yet it had characteristics which resonated, which were even archetypal, and reminded us of circumstances of today, and yet so different in values. Many such great science fictions perceive one of the worlds of the mental domain, or create their own variations of what is sensed archetypally. And in a sense, one can say these are multiple universes within this cosmos. In that sense, yes, you can say this is a multiverse. And yet everything interrelates with everything else. They are not isolated universes. Everything influences everything else. And above all these things which exist in all these worlds eventually exercise their influence on the material world, project an influence, and become part of this clash of forces which eventually settle in a particular outcome. As you go higher up, the possibilities are more fluid. As you come lower down, they concretize and become limited. In our sleep, we often wander, or a part of us wanders into these domains, generally the vital, sometimes the mental, depending on where we live more in our daily life. And we glimpse, we experience things of that world. If we train ourselves, we can become conscious and actually have our own free virtual reality game. Create your own world, play with your own realities, change things as you go along. A glimpse of this possibility is shared with us in the movie called Inception. It is worth seeing just for this possibility. The way the story has been Articulated is not so good, it becomes another shoot 'em up and fight game towards the end. But this idea that you can shape your own dream consciously and even have a dream within a dream, that's what the movie plays with, and the way it has been visually represented is extraordinary. And that's a possibility we all have, if only we take the trouble to cultivate this awareness in sleep state. There are many ways of doing that, we can discuss if there's interest. But the point I was getting at, as we return from these dream states and as we come closer to the physical world in our waking, towards our waking point, we pass through those domains which are closest to the physical, and if we see something there, it's very likely that it's about to happen in the physical world. That's why they say, it's a common traditional saying in India at least, that the dreams you have early in the morning will come true. Now, why early morning? You might just argue it out, but here is the rationale for it. Because you've already come close enough to waking point, you're seeing things which are close to the material zone. If you're woken up in the middle of the night and you remember the dream, they are often of a very different domain. Sometimes we even have different parts of our consciousness on different levels, and dream registrations on those levels take place. But because the part of consciousness registering is not connected to the physical consciousness, we forget it all in the return to the physical consciousness. I remember once it happened that I was in deep sleep, middle of the night, and there was some physical discomfort which painfully woke me. And at the moment of waking, I had the remembrance of 3 different dreams. In each of the dreams, there was this pulling back to the waking. And had I just opened my eyes and got up, I would have forgotten all 3. But somehow I held back and recalled the dreams. And I realized there were 3 levels on which dreams were going on at the same time. Under normal conditions, I would have only remembered the last one. But because this was in deep sleep and I had been woken up in this odd way, I had still the thread of the other 2. The mother describes that it's possible to train ourselves to remember the dreams. And in this way you can go backwards from the point you wake up, remembering the immediate last dream, and then train yourself to go backwards until you can recover the full thread from the point you started sleeping up to when you woke up. And it's very useful from the yogic point of view, because if you can develop that continuity of consciousness, then during sleep, instead of sliding into a subconscious condition, you can go to sleep with an aspiration, and that will sustain through the whole night, and you will wake up with the continuity of the aspiration. It's a very powerful and useful training, because otherwise we end up spending at least 1/3 of our life in that inconscience. So the point of waking up is when you are halfway in that world and halfway in this world. If you wake up then suddenly, if you move your body, you fall rapidly into this physical mind, the memory of the dream recedes. But as an experiment, I would suggest you try this. Keep a pen and paper next to you when you go to sleep. And the moment you wake up, remain absolutely still, don't move. Because the moment you move, your consciousness snaps back into the physical. If you remain very still, you will remember the last dream. And then try to pull, go backwards, draw a little more and a little more. And then very slowly, once you have recovered something useful, very slowly move your hand, pick up the pen and paper, maybe with eyes still closed or half open, write down all you can remember at that point. And already by the time you're doing that, a lot of details will begin to fade. And observe that process, it's fascinating. You actually realize so much of you is not part of your normal awareness. It was as you woke up and it's already slipping out and you can do nothing to bring it back. It's a very strange feeling. But as you persist in this, you will find more and more is retained until you're able to catch the last part of the dream with full awareness and link it to the waking state. And that's how you'll begin the full exercise of developing complete consciousness. But if you've done this, the next surprise still waits for you. You've written your last memory of the dream, you get up, get back into your normal daily routine or go for a shower and come back and look at this piece of paper on which you wrote, I don't remember writing this. And yet you had continuity of awakened awareness with eyes open. What happened? And this reveals to you something very important. What we call our normal waking state is not one but a whole range of states, of which the most superficial is what we normally keep. And there are still ranges which fade back, which are part of this, and which is what you were in when you wrote the dream. And then there's a veil as if you're crossing across, and all the rest of the memory is there of the night behind the veil. And the veil is a little wide, so there's like a blurring space, and then your so-called normal gradually. There is, we find, a continuity of consciousness going back across a veil into something. How big is it? How deep is it? This domain behind the appearances, the Sri Aurobindo calls subliminal, behind the liminal. And what is behind the liminal? What gradations exist? Behind what? When we say my waking state is this general range in which a lot of shifts take place. Behind the whole of this general range is a subliminal corresponding to all the variations of my normal range. So what is my normal range? When I am hungry, when I am tired, it's my body consciousness. I exist because I have a body. When I am enthusiastic, when I am excited, when I am energetic, with a lot of drive, passion, likes, dislikes, I exist because I crave, because I desire. It's a different domain. When I sit and think and plan, I exist because I think. But these are three different domains, and yet they're all bound together. Each affects the other two. In fact, the characteristic of our surface awareness is that these three are so tightly bound that they almost seem inseparable. But actually you can see in your own experience, there are three distinct gradations, though bound together. As you shift in though, the three begin to split, they separate. And the mind as if goes back into a world of mind, the energies go back into a world which we call the vital domain, and the physical consciousness goes back into a subtle physical, inner physical domain. It has the same density as physical matter, but it is felt almost to be transparent to our physical sight. But it is matter, it is still material. And we find therefore that within us there are three completely different gradations, all of which converge into this point that I call my waking state, surface awareness. This is the reason why when you go deep into sleep and you slide back, you end up in one of them. You don't have the same concreteness and physicality as in the waking state. If you go into the vital world, the quality and definition of your identity is your energy. Do you remember a dream when you were so excited or you were so happy that the intensity of happiness or excitement woke you up? I'm sure all of us have had that. Or fear, or some intense emotion, or sadness. You end up seeing somebody who has died and you're so sad that the intensity of sadness, boom, you wake up. But notice the point of transition. It was so intense, and yet the moment you shift into the physical waking consciousness, there's a dulling. And what remains is just as if the nerves are shaking from the intensity of that. But the intensity cannot be felt here. These nerves are unable to contain that intensity. This is in fact part of the problem of this physical consciousness. If the divine bliss, even a drop of it were to enter here, it would shatter the physical nerves. They can't contain that intensity. They can't contain the fullness of that vital experience of emotions, which is freely felt in the vital body. And a similar thing takes place in the mind. In the dream state, there's a certain wideness, plasticity and freedom of mind. When you come back here, there's this dulling effect. You notice what happens when you've eaten heavy food? Your mind becomes dull. Well, that's a fluctuation that's taking place within this range. But if you could somehow disengage from the material consciousness and go fully into a daydream, you see how freely the mind plays. So there is literally a splitting up into three domains, and we find these three are so distinctly organized, we can even call them three different bodies. And that's the yogic knowledge. We say we have three bodies or three sheaths. The Sanskrit term is kosha, literally translated as sheath. So this gross physical is the physical sheath. There is a vital sheath and there is a mental sheath. And what's the interrelation between them? The vital is larger than the physical and the mental is larger than the vital. And of course the self is all encompassing. So everything is inside the self. Quite different from the way we imagine. We think, oh, my emotions are inside me, my thoughts are inside my body, and my soul is inside all that like a point. No, it's quite the reverse. That is what in which all this takes place. It's actually a narrowing of consciousness as you enter the physical body. When the soul enters the body to take birth, it experiences a kind of a dulling and a compression of all its wideness and freedom. And it reconnects into the physical consciousness, enters, plunges headlong, and literally slams into this dullness and inertia of the physical consciousness. That's when it loses memory. And worse, it enters in identity with the physical brain. And yesterday you heard how the physical brain is undeveloped. The skull itself is too small, and as the baby grows, all that opens up and the brain develops. The first 3 years particularly, there's so much development taking place. And yet the brain is not ready to contain a fully operational mind. So what happens to a soul which comes with awareness, plunging and identifying with this? Of course it loses all memory. It loses all consciousness of that kind of a mental consciousness or vital. And it is just this body and the senses. And yet inside there is this essential, the soul itself, which is neither mind, vital or physical, which has a turn of character, a turn of its nature, svabhava, the temperament of oneself truly. Svabhava, imprinting in this physical form, projects its influence upon the world. And as they say, you can recognize the tendencies of a person while still a baby in the crib. There are those who just sleep quietly. They make very little noise or fuss. There are those who are hyperactive and they're always calling out, they're always demanding. And you know that's the temperament it's going to be through most of the life. That's the svabhava the soul has brought, which mixes in and imposes upon hereditary characteristics which the body has inherited. And sometimes even hereditary tendencies of mind and the emotional tendencies are also there, into which the soul brings its influence. Occasionally, and perhaps for many of you, you will find that you don't quite fit in your character with much of the rest of your family. And if you've ever had that, or if you see children like that, you know that that distinctive characteristic which singles them out is a soul imprint. They are more developed souls who bring much more of themselves, developed over lives, into this new form. There's an example I will give of a person I know when, even in early childhood, she was raised in America. Her family was strict in their religious tradition. They were of course non-vegetarian. And from her early childhood, she found she hated meat. She just couldn't bear it. And somewhere along the way as she grew up, she felt and she had all these turns of something of a deeper and higher aspiration which somehow didn't fit in her religious framework. And around the age of 18, suddenly memories came rushing back of her earlier lives. And then she even went to one of the locations. She found there was a memory of Europe. She went and looked in that city for the house that she remembered and found things to match, etc. But this is because the soul had brought a lot of its imprint with it, of its maturity and its tendencies. And that svabhava can override the genetic inherited tendencies. But there may be struggles. And it's important for us to introspect. Introspect to recognize what is part of the machinery of my physical, vital, mental, which is largely inherited or conditioned by environment, and what comes deep within as an imprint which I feel to be true to me, which is so essential that if I were to leave that, then I would miss the whole point of why I'm here or what I want to do or how I want to be. Recognize that distinction and consciously choose the deeper inner tendencies over the instinctive urges. Choose, begin to distinguish and then begin to choose. And you will find very quickly when you choose, when the inner asserts over the other, it can override. It can change, reshape the tendencies of the outer. If we don't make the effort, then of course the struggle continues. If we make the effort, the inner always can override the outer. We see therefore two distinct layers. The outer me, and then there is this inner me. How would you describe this inner me? How do you describe yourself as you know yourself? Or perhaps as your very few true friends know you? And you'd end up with a description that goes something like, I'm this very caring, loving, sweet, sensitive, compassionate, idealistic person. And then you say that to others and you can feel the contradiction. They don't know me like that. Or the others say, what? You have an idealistic, you're fooling yourself. That's not how you are. You are this crooked, scheming, manipulative, angry, dominant, etc. You say, no, that's not truly me. Because I am sensitive, when you say something that hurts me, I get angry. But I'm sensitive, I'm not an angry person. I don't like it when I get angry. But I can't help it. When I see something wrong happening and I try to set it right, I get carried away and I express myself with violence and anger and force and domination. That's not how I am. I just get upset when I see that wrong happening. And you're already being able to distinguish between two parts. The part where you are truly you, and in the space of action into which you move, which is not you, which is the machinery you've inherited, or the training you've got from your environment, which is quite different. And that carries you. The moment you get into this action, you get caught by the action itself. And the action possesses you, anger possesses you. And you're a victim of your own nature, outer nature, versus inner nature. Distinguish between these two. And when you can distinguish, you will find you can become very quiet, center yourself in your inner, and then slowly move into action with full awareness of who you are, what you are. And although the outer will tend to agitate and tend to push and pull, you will be able to overcome that instinctive habit. And you will be able to express and assert what you more truly are. But still that's not enough. That's not yet entirely or truly you. Behind that, remember, it's an imprint of your inner being. Behind that, the person who brought the imprint is there. Who is that? Frankly, we don't know. We feel it only by its reflections in our inner being, of which we are somewhat conscious. We feel it in the deeper and higher aspirations which emerge from us. And you'll find all of us have some dominant tendencies towards some ideal, whatever form it is, whatever, irrespective of our mental conditioning and beliefs. Even the atheist believes and aspires for something. Ask him what you need and you'll find something very interesting. In truth, in justice, in freedom, in something which you cannot define in material forms. It's an ideal. I once had a very interesting conversation with a person who belonged to the Greek Orthodox Church. As you know, the Greek Orthodox Church has lots of ritualism. His wife happened to be part of a different movement which was more spiritual than religious. And he was asked to drop me at the airport. And as we waited, we sat and he said, you know, I don't believe in all those things. So, you know, non-belief is as much a religion as belief. So I asked him, what do you not believe in? Nobody had asked this question to him. It's very easy to say, I don't accept that. So if you ask what you don't accept, or what do you accept, then you get into a bit of a quandary. So I asked him, what do you not believe in? So he thought for a while. And then he said, I don't believe in everything that my wife believes in. Very simple. So I waited, because he was still introspecting. I waited. And after a while he came up with this beautiful comment. He said, I can't believe that God would want us to do all that mumbo jumbo. And I told him, yes, I accept that. I believe what you are believing. So there was something, all these forms and conditionings of the religion, behind that he knew something. There was a conviction. And if he chose to spend some time dwelling in that, becoming conscious of what he knew, and infuse that into his life, he would be a most spiritual person. He had the spark, he had already a certain awareness of that sensitivity, and that's all that's needed. It's all inside. What brings it? What carries it? From where do these ideals come? And if we were to go back still deeper, and still deeper, and still deeper, it's a bit of a depth. So deep that normally we don't seem to be able to access it. We get only those rays, radiances, glows. Sweet sense of self-giving, consecration, sacredness, loving self-giving to the divine, true bhakti in its purity, not in its excited demonstrations. Where you feel you belong to the divine. You feel there's a purpose in life, there's something important. And it comes in a state of such deep stillness, such deep purity. States which normally we are not used to being in. But when it comes with that touch of stillness and purity, you know it's from there. And if you trace that back, just remain dwelling in that, and as if go back into the core of that purity, into that core of that stillness, into the core of your pure strain of bhakti. It leads you eventually to the source. And that source is what we call the psychic being, the soul that transitions across the lives. It is in fact a part of the divine consciousness, the substance of the divine consciousness, entering into space and time. And that is something extraordinary. In space and time, remember we discussed this in the morning's discussions, everything is in change. Everything is in movement. Not necessarily evolving, just changing. But this is one thing which comes in, which is of the essence of the spirit, substance of divinity in space-time. So small, so tiny in relation to everything else, but so pure because it is the very substance of divinity. It's the most precious thing in the manifest world. Because it is the divine itself, in a part, a portion, a fragment. But because it is now in the domain of change, it can grow. And so you have evolution of the soul itself. The self is behind that unchanging, timeless, spaceless. Because it's timeless and spaceless, of course it's unchanging. There's nothing to change there. But this portion of the self put into space-time can change, can grow. And what a beauty. And when we come close to that, when we touch that, when we receive its intimation, it fills you with such deep satisfaction, such deep sense of meaning, purpose, clarity, purity, joy, causeless. It fulfills and fills fully. Nothing else can ever satisfy as that can. In fact, the things which satisfy from outside satisfy because they nourish that. Its satisfaction is what fills you, not the thing from outside. And to find that is perhaps the single most important thing. This is the true you. And of course behind that is the self, which is one with all also, but this is the true you as the evolving being, which puts forward this imprint of all that it has gathered across lives, that imprints inside in the core of you, your inner being, your Swabhava, which then imprints and extends its influence into the outer nature, where of course it is heavily muddied and confused, which then radiates out in that condition of mixture as personality or character. This is the deeper psychology which we can become aware of, because it's our own lab. As Alok pointed out earlier, we are the lab, and everything is accessible to us if we take a little time to find it. This core psychic being has put on these three sheets of mental, vital, physical, to be able to act with thought and through thought, to be able to act with life force and through life force, to be able to act in the domain of matter and experience and grow through the experience. Above all these is something still higher, which it has not yet attained in its evolution. It has not yet organized those domains of consciousness as it has the physical, the vital and the mental. It's taking on substance and creating and organizing through its experience, enriching itself and building this facility of being able to act on all these levels. And above thought also, it must continue to grow, and that's the spiritual evolution. Opening into higher character of the mind, intuitive domains. And these are gradations of substance and consciousness which are not yet organized in us. But as we open to them and as they begin to get organized, this psychic being can act through those gradations also, until eventually all the way it will be able to act in the full range of possibilities of the cosmos. That is part of its evolution. So there's not only a vertical evolution, but there is a horizontal emergence, we won't call it evolution, where the psychic now, taking all these materials, extends its influence until eventually it controls the whole of the personality. Right now, it's more like this fellow in the control room pushing and pulling buttons, but the machinery doesn't quite work the way he asks, because there are many other buttons coming from outside which others are pushing and pulling. And it's sitting in this rider's position with a car that doesn't respond to it the way it wants. And as it extends its influence, it's gaining that control until eventually one day we say the psychic has emerged to the front, meaning only that its influence has extended all the way to the frontal part of the consciousness, and you live your life unconditioned by these mixtures of the external influences. That's when you're fully in the physical world, immersed fully. And still more is possible. This is the term Sri Aurobindo uses, psychicization. That is bringing under the influence of the psychic all these gradations all the way to the outermost. But because this core of the psychic is this pure core of harmony, sweetness and love, all those characteristics spread wherever its influence spreads. And when the psychic influence settles in the physical consciousness, it harmonizes the disharmonies. When it spreads into the emotional consciousness, it harmonizes all those contradictions of your own emotions. They become colors of one spread of its joy. And as it spreads its influence in the mind, the thoughts align themselves in a harmony and all turn towards their higher Godward aspiration. That's why Sri Aurobindo considers that the influence of the psychic emerging, at least, to be a first step in the journey of the integral yoga. And the second step is the opening upwards to the higher gradations of consciousness. In practice, both may happen at the same time. Any one may precede the other. But he says, it's best if the psychic influence at least comes forward sufficiently, that way the journey becomes safe. Safe for two reasons. One, at every step, when there is a possibility of a mixture, the psychic feels, it senses, something is not okay. Ask me what? I don't know. I just feel something is not okay. It's not an intuition. The intuition will reveal what is not okay. This is just a discrimination of the psychic. But it tells you something is not okay. It shows you when it's okay. That is the first safety. It will lead you through all the dangerous terrains, because so much confusion and mixture exists in the world and in our own consciousness. The second way by which it protects, because that's the true you, its influence prevents you from exaggerating your own ego. Suppose now suddenly I open to a high gradation of consciousness and I have these wonderful insights and intuitions. What happens to me? Oh, I am so great, I am superior to others. The ego swells up. Even it's possible to have an experience of cosmic consciousness and you come back from that and say, I am now so great, my ego swells up to the size of the cosmos. Because the whole universe is within me. You see? But when the psychic has emerged, that cannot happen. Because automatically when these things open, it turns in gratitude and self-giving towards the divine. That's the safety. If you go the other way and you get the exaggerated ego, then often it has to be battered and broken painfully. And you must as if start afresh. Get back to this deeper state, deeper identity, and once again begin the journey from a different status of consciousness. So this is broadly and in essence the nature of our being and the nature of the immediate journey we have to take up. Sri Aurobindo uses the word soul, but he qualifies it. Now in this context we will understand. He says there are three souls. There is the outermost soul, which he also describes as the desire soul. The person that we identify with when we say, I am me, who are you? Because I define myself in terms of my likes and dislikes and my desires. That's what defines you. If I ask you what characterizes this person, let's talk of a third person. Do you know that guy? What's he like? They say, oh, he's like this, he's like that. And you'll see the whole description of the person primarily centers on his likes and dislikes and behavior patterns, the outermost ego consciousness, desire soul. But that's the false soul. And yet that's our starting point. When we become conscious, that's not really me. The real me inside is this sweet, gentle, sensitive person. That shift to that is what he calls the inner soul, not the desire soul. That's not driven by desire, it's driven by a certain idealism. And then behind that is true psychic being within, which is the one who journeys. That's the inmost soul or the true soul or psychic being. These are different terms we use for the same thing. So when you listen to soulful music, it's not the psychic. It's often something pulling at your emotions and deep emotions perhaps, but often a part of the external desire soul. That's what they refer to as soulful music. It makes you feel this haunting feeling, pulls and tugs at your sensitive emotions, and that's about it. It stops with that. It doesn't touch your deeper aspirations, does not turn you upwards. That's still part of the inner soul. So you must keep this in mind when we come across this word soul and learn to discriminate which soul is being referred to. So I suppose this was a broad framework I wanted to place before you, and there are many questions which people have asked, and I would open the space now for whatever you would like to ask.
Could you touch on the dream experience in which the dream is so real? For example, one wakes up sobbing and one experiences the entire dream, writes it down, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years later, one recalls it exactly.
Yes. There are broadly 3 types of dreams. The first type is primarily imprints emerging from your subconscious, chaotic things you've done in the day, things you've thought, things settled in your subconscious over decades, which just pop up as images and settle. And it's generally a very chaotic mix of images, scenes, experiences, energies. That's the bulk of the dreams which most people have. There's a second kind of dream, which is an out-of-body experience, in a sense, a part of your consciousness wandering in those planes, experiencing things, and they can be quite vivid. One can wake up in them and be conscious you're dreaming, or simply you had a bad contact, you had a nightmare where this thing hit you and you have the impact of it still remaining with you when you wake up. And there's a third kind of dream, which is a symbolic dream, or what may be even described as a dream experience, where something is happening on one of these higher domains which your conscious mind registers in a symbolism, or even a full experience, a dream experience where you have an interaction with a person or with a representation of the divine, and you come back with the full intensity of that experience still held as concretely as if you had it physically. These are rare, most rare, but they are also most valuable, because they represent a real meaningful experience impacting you, but held on one of those worlds, whichever level it was that it took place. And it could be on many levels. Even a spiritual experience can be had on many levels. So for example, some people in the ashram would narrate they had a dream experience in which they met the mother, and they had this very concrete interaction, and even her hand placed on your head, and you wake up with that feeling still held. And even after you've started your day and you're in your routine, you remember the dream and you can feel that still touching. That's the kind of concreteness it can carry. These are experiences given to us. And they are as concrete as an experience given in the physical, often more concrete, because they do not carry the dullness of the physical consciousness. They were registered in that part, and something of your inmost being has come forward, taking the full impact of that experience and holding it. That's why you never forget it, because it's held deep within, in the part which is most truly you, not just a memory in the mental world.
Question over here. Oh, sorry.
What happens to the soul after death?
In the immediate point of transition, at the time of death, there is always a choice of the soul. I mentioned that book which describes across various traditions, across religious beliefs, at the moment of an accident, there is this brief flash in which the whole life is reviewed. In a flash, in a moment. And then there's a point of choice. Have I finished my work? And wherever the person felt, no, there is still something remaining, they survived the accident. Now this is very interesting. The accident is happening in physical time, you're about to crash, and on a subtle level, it's already been seen. The inner sight has seen it, it's braced itself, and the inmost soul comes forward, seizes the moment, and that's why it's like a timeless moment. It reviews, no, I have to stay. And then there is an extension of an influence, either from within or a call for help from above and an intervention. And the crash takes place, you get a knock, but you're saved. Or you're injured, but you recover, or whatever happens. And often that moment is transforming. Because very briefly the inner had a chance to come forward. The outer was shocked, stunned into silence. That came forward. And after that people change their life. They are changed often as people. But there's this point of choice. Very rarely you have actual accidents where the soul is kicked out of the body, not wanting to leave. And then it needs to take birth quickly to continue what it wanted to finish. But otherwise, if it is a choice, it leaves because it has chosen to leave. But when it leaves, it shuts down the whole machinery of the vehicle which it was living in. So the blood flow slows down, the life signals slow down, and then the heart finally stops. So the doctor says, he died of massive heart attack. No, the soul shut down the heart when it left. Like you turn off the tap, switch off the lights when you leave the house. The life force sustaining was withdrawn. And then it finds itself floating above. It sees its body, it sees the people, because it's still in the material world, though in the subtle physical. I told you that it has the character of the physical, but it's invisible to these eyes. It could perhaps be detected by machinery which has a wider range of electromagnetic registrations. That's how they often detect the presence of what they call ghost hunters use that. They detect presence of something, some entity, but only catching things which are very close to the material, otherwise they may not catch it. Then it's intruding in a space which is still physical, though subtle physical, and outside the range of our limited senses. But he is able to see you. And if you cry, if you weep, if you are unhappy, it affects him as if he's standing next to you. It's disturbing. And that's why they say when someone passes on, create a space of peace, prayer, and that helps. It helps them to let go and move on also. Otherwise you're pulling back, you're interfering in their freedom to leave. And then there's a passage where it may pass through those intermediate worlds. Over a few days it will discard even the vital sheath. The sheath formed of its energies and desires. And if it had strong passions and desires, sometimes they remain as formations in the atmosphere and may even try to execute themselves, to exhaust themselves. So often we have this idea that when someone has passed on, you feed animals, you feed the crow. Because if they have any unfulfilled desire, we want them to exhaust through the animals. So if somebody had very strong passion for food, that part of his vital being may attach itself to a creature which has the same passion, because there's a resonance of similarity. Or whatever its desire was, it finds some being to catch and works itself out and then eventually exhausts. But the person is not there. The person didn't get into a crow. It's wrong to say that, oh, because he was full of desire, he got into an animal birth. That's not how it is. A part of his vital remained there. But he has moved on. Vital sheath dropped. And then the mental sheath. Depending on its maturity, a part of it remains, or the mental is discarded and only the essence of the experience is retained. And the psychic being then withdraws inwards into a state of rest, a kind of a trance. You will find in Savitri a beautiful passage describing this psychic world. Souls in internatal trance. And then, having assimilated the full experience of life, when it is ready and it has completed assimilation, it then turns once again towards the earth domain. Next. Now what happens, the point of choice of what it wants to do next, very often takes place at the time of leaving. You've finished all this, now what? And the sight turns to, this is what I need next. You may have had this experience, it happens to us so often. When we have done a lot of things, you say, okay, now I'm tired of this. What do I want? And your sight turns to the next useful experience for you. It's something like that. It's finished this and it turns. I've had a life where I had all the conveniences. Now I want to experience a life of deprivation. I've had a life where I experienced strength and power and dynamism. I want a life of contemplation. I had a life where I did a lot of business. Now I want to be a philosopher. Whatever form it takes, it turns, and that becomes the imprint of its preparation. So during the assimilation, it's already preparing for that turn, rearranging its experience in preparation. That's why in many yogic and religious traditions, they say the point of transition at the end of death is extremely important. Because what you are in at that point is what will be your preparation in the next. If at that point you are turned in or in a confused state, you won't have the clarity to make a clear transition. So they even suggest in certain traditions that you prepare for your death and experience what is often called a little death. That is the full freedom of your attachment to the particular forms of life you were in, turning inward, centering in your contemplation on the divine, preparation for what is your highest aspiration and turning towards that. this is all useful. So that then has been in preparation in that trance of assimilation, and when it's ready, it turns in preparation for the next birth. Now, depending on the maturity of the soul, two things may happen. A less developed soul would simply be pulled and in quality of vibration to what it is seeking and be drawn to whatever resonates in the world to that vibration. And it experiences and sees it often like a point of light that draws it. In that darkness, there's a point of light. That's what it is. And it surges forward and moves to that. Sometimes there are beings whose job it is to help you find your right container, and they assist. There are also, as they approach the more material consciousness, there are beings who try to divert the soul by creating artificial lights of attraction or distraction. And sometimes then a soul may take birth, and having been born, it discovers this is not what I was looking for, and it leaves. And you have what they call crib death. Either it finds the instrument is defective, or it finds the circumstances were wrong and it leaves. But if it has found the right place, it enters often before birth, sometimes at birth, rarely even after birth. But if the soul is more mature, then it may choose more clearly, more freely. It may be drawn to certain types of consciousness. It may even come to parents because of that affinity. It may even come before conception. It may come after conception at any time during those 9 months. If it is more developed, it will want to preside over the formation of the fetus and extend a certain influence in its formation. Whenever it comes from that point, it will extend. And it will enter either before birth, during birth, or after. In rare cases, when it is very developed or contains too much of power or maturity, it may find the vehicle too fragile to take it fully, so it may put a part of itself in the vehicle, and we find the child is sleeping for long durations, and then gradually over a few days or weeks, the rest of the whole being will settle in and fully enter. All of these possibilities exist depending on the soul, depending on the circumstances. There's a huge range of free possibilities. It's not a fixed rule. Very rarely a mature soul finds parents who aspire for something special and who have the quality of consciousness of purity which it will find helpful for it. And that is a rare gift. But they look for this, especially the more mature souls, they look for that opportunity.
I have the microphone. I don't know if it's working or not. Why does a mala have 108 beads, and why can you not go over the last bead? And what is the purpose of a mala?
It's a very interesting question. You had a question relating to the soul?
Yes.
Okay, maybe I'll finish that and then come to the mala.
Thanks.
Just ask your question.
I'm born in a Jain family, as I mentioned, and in the Jain tradition, at least this was my understanding, that that the soul is pure Atma, and without any qualities, and realizing the soul is the way to liberation. Once you realize the soul, that is the goal, and you attain moksha. So it is a pure thing without anything. But the psychic being, as described by Sri Aurobindo, mother, is apparently different, has a quality evolutionary trend, and it carries on from birth to birth. And a link to that is this thing about, so you mentioned that the vital sheet and the mental sheets are discarded. So what is carried forward of the person? And also linked to that, the karmas, how are the karmas carried forward?
These are one important questions. When a tradition seeks to liberate itself from ignorance in order to merge into the source, then the psychic becomes irrelevant. And therefore the traditions don't give it too much importance. They may describe it though as this thumb-sized individual or a source of light, quoted from various traditions also. But otherwise, this also is seen as part of the machinery, part of the changing circumstance, and such a tradition may seek to liberate by direct emergence in the self, unqualified, unchanging, spaceless, timeless, and in which relation therefore the psychic is not necessary. But if our choice is to affirm life and manifest the self into life, then the psychic becomes the most important thing, because it is the one thing in our whole being which has the quality of the self and yet is in space and time and can manifest through changing form. It's the bridge, the single most important thing. So it depends on what one aims at, and then the priorities change. But the knowledge of the self, etc., and even the knowledge of an emanation of the self in space-time exists in many of these traditions, though not always commonly known. As far as what is transmitted across, I use the word, it's experience, growth through experience. If I ask you a question, you went through so many exams in your school days. What do you carry from all those exams?
Hatred for exams.
Hatred for exams, yes. And the capacity to work hard at doing something which you hate to do. That's the capacity you developed while preparing for the exams. And then perhaps from the things you studied, a perspective of history, of the development, tendencies, trends of human development. And today when you look at political developments, you say, that's similar to something else. But names and dates you've forgotten. A perspective of the scientific understanding of the world, a development of your logical faculties, a development of your imagination, of your creative power, etc. That's what stays with you. The specifics of forms are all lost. And similarly, when the psychic being takes from the life the essence of the experience, it is something similar. The forms of experience are lost. The growth from that experience, the development of its faculties and its powers of expression, those remain. Now consider, in the whole lifetime, what are the things which have helped to develop that? Which were the moments when that developed? If you look at your whole life, you'll find so few. But those are the few moments by which the soul grows. Especially in the beginning, when it is not mature enough. Once it is mature enough, it exercises an influence on the nature and personality to try to draw more opportunities. But otherwise, this is all. And what is it that it takes in? Those moments when the outer nature turned upwards, towards beauty, towards truth, towards true love, towards the divine in bhakti. Those are the moments which are nourishment for the soul. Beauty draws the psychic being. Truth, sacredness and love for the divine. These are the things which are its substance of nourishment. In the yogic tradition, we have a beautiful symbol for the source, for the soul, that is the swan. The swan in the Vedic tradition is the soul journeying across lives. And we say, the swan has this capacity to separate mixtures. And the tradition goes, and children are taught without realizing what it means. If you take milk and mix water in it and give it to a swan, the swan will drink the milk and leave the water. Of course, the physical swans don't do that. They can't do that. But that swan, the soul, does that. All experience of life is mixed. It takes from it that essence, the milk, leaves the rest. And when a person remembers past lives, they don't remember what we did. They don't remember that I ate idli or I ate dosa or I had a quarrel with X or Y. You don't even remember people when you meet them in another life, if they were merely casual acquaintances, even if they are family members. Unless there was a deeper connection touching that deeper aspiration or those values which the soul cherishes, which are its nourishment. Then it remembers those and those moments. I'll give you an example. I told you of this person who remembered her past lives at the age of 18. So at various times I heard certain incidents and they badged. One example she gave was, there was a life in England, it was somewhere on the eastern part of England. She couldn't get specifics, but no names, the city's name is gone, it's irrelevant. It was somewhere in that area because of the vibrational quality. And she remembers, she had a son who was a highly developed yogi, ascetic in whatever the tradition was. The religion is irrelevant, she doesn't remember. And she remembers that she was serving him. She would go every day, he had a little hut, she would give him the food, and that was her service. And the whole life was this life of service to this great being with so much love and dedication. And the love and dedication expressed, that's the nourishment. That's all that remains. That's the only memory of an entire life. That's all that was relevant. And when we bring consciously our life in touch with the divine consciousness, there is so much more, and the rapidity and the joy of the soul's growth fills it, and there is so much more that it can take. But that's the only growth that remains. When it comes to other things, let's say specifics of knowledge, I am a great musician, I am famous, I play very well. But that's part of the imprint in the physical, vital and mental consciousness. When the soul leaves, all that skill developed falls apart as the body is dissolved. Unless in that music, in that skill, I infuse that deeper aspiration. When I play, I lose myself in that aspiration. I express something of that beauty and joy which I sense in those deeper parts. Music is my tool for self-expression or even for receiving a higher inspiration. And when it resonates with the values of the psychic being, that quality remains. And depending on which part it was, you may have just this as a mental experience, or you may bring it all the way into the physical. There are cases of great musicians whose hands were participating in that. And therefore just the hand consciousness remains psychicized and is absorbed into the psychic being therefore. And then when it goes on into the next life, it carries those imprints. And we find suddenly this child has an unusual aptitude for music. But the imprint of the soul is not to continue what it did last time, it wants to do something else. So the parents say, oh, you are so good at music, you have the skill, you must become a musician. And the child says, no, I want to do something else, I want to go and do my sports. There's this whole conflict that's going on.
Are there only positive things that are left or some negative?
Yes. So there can also be injuries which get transmitted.
What is it?
Injuries. A shock. And don't like to give these examples, but you consider what happened to the Holocaust victims in the Second World War. The most painful, tragic ending that they had to go through leaves a shock of pain and suffering on the psychic being. See, unlike the self, which is ever free, the psychic being is in space-time and it has a character of humanity. It is the essence of our humanity. It can suffer. But its suffering is different. It suffers when the personality goes contrary to its aspiration. When the man indulges in falsehood and perversion and the psychic being is trapped in this contrary vehicle, it suffers and even it weeps. Deep sadness. If you see people who do that, knowingly they do falsehood and harm to others, you'll find there's a stone cold surface and behind that surface the psychic weeps. That may remain as an imprint. Or this, what we call betrayal of trust. A deep trust set and somebody betrays it, that hurts on that level. Those imprints do remain. And it may carry over as an unusual discomfort with certain things or certain types of experiences which go over. So yes, negative things do carry over if they affected the psychic. You got a blow, I hurt my hand. No, but that stays. The karmic imprint is more complex. The primary vehicle of karma carried over is in the mental being. Primary vehicle. But there is an association with that soul consciousness in its relationship with the whole of nature, which may also carry other imprints. That's why we say the intention is more important than the actual act. I bumped into you by mistake, that doesn't cause significant karmic harm. Yes, on a material there's a karmic response instantly. I kicked you, I got hurt just as well as you got hurt. Action-reaction story. But on a psychological level, the responses are delayed. And it is on that level that it is also carried over into other lives. The question here is of the quality of energy you throw out. If I throw out energies wanting to hurt with intent, the mind substance organized to harm, to hurt. Emotional energy organized to express hatred, ill will. Those are the things which are going out of my consciousness, impinging into the world, and of course there's a rebound, a response. And even sometimes it's very, very concrete that a thought energy goes out, provokes certain disturbances, exhausts its energy, but the thought form is still strong because it was clearly articulated. And then the form has lost energy, it comes back to me, sucks my energy, goes back to do it again. And then comes back and sucks my energy and goes back. And if you're conscious, you will even register these things. Now, I'll give you an example. A businessman puts a very strong mental formation to get a certain response from a person. It actually goes and affects the person. The work is done or not done, time has passed. A month later, suddenly you find this idea coming back upon him and pushing him in the middle of maybe the point of transition of sleep. He's aware. Why is this thing coming back? It's all over. He's not conscious. It's his own thought formation which now comes back and attaches itself. In the aura, all these formations hang around you like baggage. Many of these things pass on with the dissolution of these bodies. Some of these things which relate to the deeper causes or imprints on the mental consciousness, they sustain and are continued into the next life. So the mental body in particular, because it is so much more plastic, of that the psychic being absorbs much more in terms of experience. But because it is also in a domain which is of the level the psychic being lives in, on that level the energies are still aligned. When it returns into its life, those energies are there waiting, in a sense. Not the little things, oh I criticized you, I hurt you, but the more concrete things. The smaller things often, they're like bubbles, they burst, they neutralize each other, positive, negatives. It's not a mathematical thing. Some of them just lose energy and fizzle out on their own. But the more strong, sustained energies one puts out, intentions, those remain. And they come back in some form or other. There is even, for the psychic being, a choice of how much it can take up of its karma. There may be a whole range of possibilities, but it picks from that what is useful for the line of experience it wants, if it is a developed, more developed psychic being. Otherwise, well, it just is dragged on through life, things come upon it one way or other. So often, a person, and I give a very extreme example, a person who was involved during the Crusades, or one of those kinds of wars where he consciously blinded his enemies as a form of torture. The energy put out, the imprint created in all these people comes back upon him. He is born blind or acquires some serious illness of sight early on in his age, or repeated problems relating to sight again and again. Nothing seems to be able to resolve it. All of these things can take place. The particular form in which it returns is again not fixed. It's just an energy. An energy flows and fits into whatever form can best express it. But it's an energy that must consume and exhaust itself. You can, though, free yourself from past karma. There are three things you can do. First, you create an opposing energy, a neutralizing energy. Where you threw out hatred, you now put out love. that neutralizes. Second, you can rise above in consciousness from the level at which you generated the karma. You can rise above it, and then it ceases to affect you and it dissolves on its own. Third, you can invoke a higher intervention through prayer, through consecration, through a call. The divine grace can step in and modify anything. But they say, even the divine grace will not touch certain types of karma, the most extreme. Utkata karma is the term we use. The last reduced karma, which is the most hard of all, it may not touch that. The modern New Age terminology unfortunately uses these yogic terms very loosely. So anybody who is teaching, we call them guru. Anybody who puts on ochre robes and takes a vow of asceticism is called a swami or a guru. Anybody who heads an institution is labeled whatever. But in the true sense, the guru in a spiritual tradition, not in some other form, but in the spiritual tradition, the guru is one who leads you to God by the strength of his own experience, who takes responsibility for your spiritual development, and as part of that responsibility may take upon himself a part or the whole of your karma to assist you in moving forward more rapidly. That's the responsibility of the guru, and it's a very great responsibility. Very few are authorized even to take up that role from the pure spiritual perspective. Of course, one can name oneself anything and project oneself as a guru, but it's not the true guru. The true guru takes that burden. I give you an example which was in our ashram. Somebody wrote to Sri Aurobindo and said, in my family tradition, we go to so-and-so person and take initiation. And he'd already been in the ashram, he'd been accepted. And he said, my family insists that I should go and do that because it's a ritual we all do in our family. Now for the family it was just a ritual, it meant nothing. But Sri Aurobindo wrote back to him and said, because you have come here and we have taken responsibility for you, we have taken upon ourselves the burden of your karma. If you go to that person and receive initiation from him, all that burden will return upon you. Because he's breaking away from a certain alignment and entering into a different alignment, but with a very different kind of competence. So one has to be careful with these matters of the use of the word guru, even whom we accept, how we accept. And certainly even just as a disciple has a choice to accept a guru, the guru has a choice to accept a disciple and may not accept if he feels inappropriate or he feels somebody else is meant to be the person's spiritual guru. And I'm using the word guru as distinct from teacher. A teacher may teach many things and he goes away. He's not responsible for what you do with the teaching. A guru is responsible. Okay. So we'll come to the question of the 108. It's a very interesting question, and I asked her to place it here in the group because there's something fascinating I have to share on that. See, in the whole domain of this cosmos, there are very few things which are absolute. Everything is changing, everything is relative, but there's something quite interesting. Numbers and their relationships remain constant. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 from the beginning of the cosmos to the end of the universe. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 here on Earth and on Jupiter and across any corner of the universe, isn't it? Isn't that an absolute? A relationship of numbers, but which is permanent. 24 is divisible by all these numbers permanently. And you see in numbers and numerical relationships something of the touch of the absolute represented in the relatives. That is why in the ancient traditions they saw numbers as having mystical power, representing aspects and powers of the divine. This is the basis of many of the magical symbols and signs where they play with numbers, numerology and other things. Numerology is still a very mixed thing, but the representation of numbers in what is called a magic square. You know what is a magic square? All the columns add up to the same number, all the lines, horizontal lines add up to the same number, and the diagonals add up to the same number. So magic square with the total adding up to 36, magic square with the total adding up to 24. You can create many of these. Interestingly, you can't create that for any number, but only specific numbers. And interestingly, those numbers are associated with certain powers. But the magic square is called magic square because it used to be used in magic. It actually creates a field of resonance invoking or evoking that particular quality. Now, what I'm getting to still at before I come to 108. So we realize numbers have special qualities, characteristics. And as is the case, all of us have an intuitive sense of these qualities of numbers. I'll just give you an example. Which number, I will mention two numbers. Which number do you feel to be softer, 24 or 23? That's interesting.
23.
Most of you at least are speaking of 24 as softer. Who said 23? Okay. Do you have a special relationship with 23? Okay. Most people will feel 24. Okay. Tell me which one is feminine and which is masculine? Which is 23 is what? Now most people will tend to feel even numbers as feminine and odd numbers as masculine. Why? It's just the quality you feel. 24 you feel softer, 23 you tend to feel harder. You can actually play with various kinds of qualities with numbers and even a sound associated with certain numbers. And unless a person has a birthday on that number, a house number or some special affinity which may change your specific relationship with it, you'll find there are characteristics of each number. And this is just to show you that there are things about it we don't fully appreciate or understand. But most of all then, because numbers represent those aspects or powers of the divine, they tend to appear in the rhythms of the cosmos. 7 being the sevenfold manifestation of Brahman, 7 gradations of consciousness. Repeating everywhere in each gradation again sevenfold. Within that sevenfold, you will find 7 appearing all over, all the time in every possible symbolisms. Similarly, 100 represents the whole, and you'll find 100 appearing in the Veda. There's a whole rationale for why it represents whole, etc. 1 of course represents the unity, and it's special. 2 represents the duality, and so on. These are obvious. 108 is very special. It has a certain mystical power. And because it has a power, it appears automatically in rhythms in the universe. And I'll show you something very special, specific to the earth. You've seen a solar eclipse. The moon comes and fits the sun exactly. So exactly that it covers the disk of the sun and you see only the corona of the sun. It's a beautiful sight. And then moves off. Do you know that Earth is the only planet and the moon is the only moon where this combination occurs? Jupiter has some 20 moons. Pluto now has a 4th moon. Nowhere in the solar system do you have a moon which fits the sun's disk exactly to produce this beautiful experience. Only Earth has it. And this is because there is a certain mathematical proportion. From Earth to the sun, the distance, divided by diameter of sun, is exactly same as from Earth to moon, divided by diameter of moon. So you get this very clear geometrical proportion, right? Interestingly, that proportion is 108. From Earth to the sun divided by diameter of sun is 108. From Earth to moon divided by diameter of moon is 108. Amazing, isn't it? Miraculous, you might say. It can't be a coincidence. There are 4 astronomical numbers: Earth to sun distance, Earth to moon distance, diameter of sun, diameter of moon. All 4 are bound together with 208s. Not coincidence. And yet, well, it could be coincidence. You are on the brink now. I'll push you a little further. The lunar eclipse, where Earth's shadow comes on the moon? And Earth's shadow comes and fits the moon exactly. And why is that? Because there is a relationship between Earth's diameter and the Sun's diameter and these distances. And what's the relationship? Sun's diameter divided by Earth's diameter is 108. Wow. Now you have 5 astronomical figures. Sun's diameter, Earth diameter, Moon diameter, distance from Earth to Sun, distance from Earth to Moon, bound together by 308s. Can't be coincidence. Now you'll agree with me. Can't be coincidence. In fact, these proportions are so set that the Earth is just the right distance from the Sun, that it's neither too hot nor too cold, which allows it to have the kind of life that we have. And the Moon is just the right distance from the Earth, that it creates these tides, but does not either spiral into the Earth nor drift away, just keeps the balance. So, in this 108 signature, it's as if the one who put these 3 in relation for Earth life put the stamp of its signature and said, here, I did it, signed and sealed, 108. So in 108 we feel this special relationship, 3 times holding the Earth, Moon, Sun together. But in the symbolism though, it has a beautiful meaning. If you observe the sun rising, and for the sun for all the ancient traditions was the symbol of the divine, the truth, the source of all light, all knowledge, the supramental consciousness. All traditions. And when you see the sun rising, if you had to walk to the sun to reach that source, that truth, how many steps would you take? And a step is measured now by the size of the sun that you see. How many sun steps will you take to reach the sun? 108. And suddenly 108 becomes as if a symbol of the steps you take to reach your goal, the divine. When you're doing your mala, each is a step towards the goal, and then you complete one cycle reaching the goal. And then start another cycle and another cycle. Deep symbol. But the 108 is even more interesting. It doesn't stop with that. This was just an astronomical relationship. There's more to it. The meaning of these numbers is something so subliminal, above mind, let's say. The power they hold is above mind. So intellectually you can see it in many ways, but the truth of it is held not intellectually. So I'm going to show you other ways of looking at it. And at some point it just stuns the mind, and then you kind of open to something else. You can feel it a little bit. So here we saw an astronomical alignment and how it could be represented and what it could mean quite intellectually or intuitively. Then we come into the earth and we look at the human consciousness. And we find that at the moment of birth there's a particular imprint of astronomical influences which tends to shape our personality. And that's the basis of astrology. And we find in that the types of influence are so many. There are the 12 signs of the zodiac imprinting on you. And then those signs are modified by 9 planets moving across. And the total variations of influences which can imprint to shape your personality are 12 multiplied by 9, 108. Interesting, isn't it? All of us have an imprint of personality at birth, which is a combination of a selection of these 108 influences. Psychologically, we are so formed. But there's another influence more specific, much closer, more intense, especially to our emotional being, and that is the moon. And in the Vedic astrology, we find the moon goes around the whole earth once every about 28 days. 29 days. It's actually 28 and a half. I'm sorry. 27 days. Yeah, 27 days. It's about 27 and a half or 26 and a half. So 27 days the moon takes to go around. And each day that the moon moves across is described in astrology as one of the mansions of the moon. There are many stories which narrate to you the meaning of each of these mansions. So one of the stories, mythological, symbolical, is the moon had 27 wives. And each day he spent with one of them. And then you describe the qualities of each of the wives. One of them, Rohini, is his favorite. And because he likes to spend more time with her, so the father of all these 27 maidens, he curses the moon. You are condemned, therefore, to wane, to shrink and fade away. And moon says, I'm so sorry. My father says, all right, but I can't take back my curse, so every time you finish and fade out, you'll fade back in. So you have the lunar steps, and each step he fades in, fades out, etc. But each of these has a meaning, the 27 maidens, etc. Rohini is where the moon is exalted and most happy and most powerful. But each day, the moon moves 4 steps within the day. And each of the 4 has a different quality of influence. And then we find 27 multiplied by 4 and 108 lunar influences. And they change every 6 hours. So there are many rituals, magical or otherwise invocatory rituals, which depend on this timing and can be only started at specific times of the lunar steps. Much of this knowledge now is fading away, but it is still prominent in those who follow those rituals. So psychologically we find 108 appearing twice, impacting on our mind. Physically, another interesting relationship. In the science of dance, Bharatanatyam, the most ancient text on dance, manual of dance, as ancient, they say, approaching the time of the Vedas. It was revealed. And it does not tell you, this is correct dance, that is wrong dance. It does not teach you dance styles. It starts by saying, if the human body wants to express itself, what are all the gestures and movements by which it can express? It is a comprehensive body of knowledge. It doesn't limit, it liberates. And it categorizes all these movements. And then, there are certain movements which are not just gestures, they're all movements, they have to be dynamic. They categorize certain essential movements, which among all of them complete all possible expressions. And you cannot create another expression which is not already included in these. These are called karanas. And a master dancer is one who has mastered all the karanas. If you can master all the karanas, you are a great dancer. You can do anything with your body, express anything. You'll be perfectly fluid and flexible in your power of expression of any kind of consciousness. And as it turns out, the number of karanas are 108. And then we find another example in the human body again. But this is the body's design, remember. We find another example in the human body, the gestures, significant gestures of power. They are called mudras. So each gesture represents something. Now if you want to show anger towards another, automatically your hand goes into a fist, isn't it? Why? You didn't think about it. It's just the natural form the energy takes when you want to express that quality. What are all the qualities you could express, which would express as power to act and change circumstances? Now those who have the knowledge of mudras can actually change their internal or their external states by using these combinations of significant gestures. And as it turns out, the total number of significant gestures are also 108. I'll leave you with 2 more things. So this is human body and you have 208s in its design. I'll leave you with 2 more 108s. This goes into the physical, material, earth consciousness. We have the famous story in the Hindu mythology where Sati, who loves Shiva, is disappointed because her father refuses, does not permit Shiva to marry her because he is an ascetic. No way, he will not allow her to marry him. So she is so upset, she jumps into the fire and she dies. There's a deep symbolism in the whole thing, which perhaps Alok can share with us later. But Shiva is so sad, he lifts her body, and in his passion of sadness, he dances the Tandava, and the whole universe begins to shake, and the whole universe will fall apart. And somehow, all the appeals of the gods are not heard by him because he is so lost in his sadness and remorse. And then Vishnu has to free him from that condition. He releases his disc, which goes and cuts up Sati into 54 parts, body parts. They all fall upon the earth, and each body part becomes therefore a sacred space. Shiva, of course, is freed from his delusion, goes back and does his meditation, and of course she is reborn and he weds her friend. But meanwhile, these body parts have fallen on earth, and they are considered to be sacred spaces to this day. There are temples at each of these. And it's interesting, there's one place where the left eye has fallen, another place where the right eye has fallen. And there's a whole occult symbolism here, each body part representing, manifesting a particular quality of consciousness. In the occult tradition, the left eye is the eye which looks within into the hidden worlds. The right eye is the one which looks outside into the apparent world. If you go to the seat of the left eye, you have there the consciousness of the power to gaze into the inner worlds, and so on. And these are very real living traditions to this day in India. Interestingly, wherever Sati has fallen, she is not alone. A part of Shiva's consciousness is with her also. The two together united, but now distributed in 54 parts, their total together is 108, he and she together bound. In manifestation, they are always together. And this same idea is represented visually in the mystical symbol representing the cosmos, which is called the Shri Yantra. If you're familiar with that, it's a series of triangles interlocked, surrounded by a square-like structure. Very auspicious because it represents the whole cosmos and the Divine Mother in manifestation in the cosmos. The divine power as it turns to. And the Shri Yantra actually is a three-dimensional shape. There is a massive temple made in the shape of the Shri Yantra, which is Borobudur. If you have heard of it, look it up on the internet. It's done as a 3D shape of this. It represents the whole cosmos. And there's a whole deep symbolism in the triangles and all of it. They represent the different worlds and the levels from the one to the many. But interestingly, if you study the two-dimensional representation, the crisscrossing triangles, the total number of interconnections, crosses, are 108. And they represent in the descending and ascending triangles the two powers of Shiva and his Shakti. The consciousness presiding and the consciousness dynamizing, the two are always together. Even as the dynamic power flows to manifest, the presiding power supports and follows below. Each point of a manifestation is an outburst of a new multiplicity, and each of those is a new creative outburst, and each of those is a new creative outburst. Always he and she together. In Savitri, there's this beautiful description of the play of he and she, and all this universe is only he and she. This is a very deep spiritual perception, but the Shri Yantra captures that, and the meeting of he and she complete is 108. So behind 108 now you can perhaps feel in all these different domains of manifestation, of organization of the cosmos, there is a common resonance of something which completes, which holds he and she together to create a complete manifestation. And physically, materially, on a astronomical level, earth, moon, sun are bound with this same power, which allows them to manifest on earth in a special way. Or because they manifest here in a special way, they represent in that astronomical relationship. So this is the secret or a glimpse into the secret of 108. Shall we close with a concentration
Yeah, sure.
for a minute?